have Loon, Emilia, and Pierre. Can I ask you for your preferred gender pronoun?
Emilia, she, Pierre, he.
Thank you. On second proposition, we have Belgrade B. Can we ask you for your preferred gender pronoun? On second opposition, we have Leiden, Dan, and Karin. Can I ask you for your preferred gender pronoun?
Karen, I don't mind.
Thank you. Without further ado, I would like to invite the Prime Minister to open the meeting. Behind the podium, there's some space.
You can more the podium first.
Order. Sorry.
Thank you. Now, three things I'll bring you today, like broadly speaking. One, on why do we need to do this? Two, on why this mechanism is probably the best thing for resolving these issues today. And three, I'm going to start speaking about the benefits of this and how this will lead, in the end, to better inclusion in these societies and to better life of the people in our congregation. And we are, of course, advocating this from the condition of religious leaders. Now, what is the issue at hand that we really would like to solve here? Now, we see that a current context in Europe is a rather aggressive one towards the minorities, especially religious minorities. Now, why is that so? Firstly, you have an economic crisis, and that means that people are rather frustrated and in need of someone else to be blamed for their own misheals, right? That's like basic psychology. People don't want to feel like it is their own fault for failing. Now, also, apart from that, you have a great influx, a disproportionate influx of immigrants from countries which are like of very different culture and religion. We feel that these people who are like coming in vast numbers also can provide to be something of a threatening image for the majority, which we find problematic. Now, all this creates, all these contexts and narratives, create basically somewhat of a rise of some sort of right-wing groups, which basically hijack these narratives and speak about them in a negative context. Like case in point, in France, for example, where right-wingers keep speaking about immigrants and Muslims like they are our enemies. Or, for example, Geert Wilders in the Netherlands, when he continuously speaks about Islam and Quran as enemies of democracy and enemies of the West. We think that this sort of dichotomy between the majority and minority is very harmful for the minority for the simple reason that there is not enough of them to be influential enough, and a sufficient political bargaining chip is not in their hands to fight for their own rights in a sufficient manner. We think that this context, which is very pernicious for them, should be included in our analysis. But moreover, here's how this mechanism basically alleviates these harms, right? The fact that they are being viewed as more and more aggressive, as more and more foreign, and as more as enemies. We say this mechanism is wonderful because religious leaders of minority groups are usually the ones that are like local leaders. They look up to them because they are something that they can connect with, because they share their values, because they speak of their country or of their culture, of their language, of something they really care deeply about. We say that they will listen to these people, and we say that they will refrain from public displays of their faith. Now, what do I mean by refraining from public displays? It's rather simple from our side. We say that these people should be encouraged not to wear anything with them, like for example, I don't know, a burqa or something else, like pieces of clothes, like symbols, religious symbols in public places. No, thank you.
Clarification.
And no, it's okay. Clarification, yeah. Sorry.
Right. Would this include, say, striving for prayer rooms, striving for prayer calls from minarets, those things, striving to establish those things as well?
Striving for?
Striving to establish prayer rooms in schools, having minarets and prayer calls from those, is that included?
No, we're just simply saying that they should refrain this from public space. They should still fight for this, but we don't think that like in schools and in other rooms they should wear this. We don't think that they should advocate. Yeah, actually, yes. The answer is it includes that. I just said no, but I meant Yes. So in context, you can basically understand this because it's like public squares, schools, something that is already forbidden to a certain extent in France, and a similar case was in Italy with the cross and everything. We believe that this is something that is beneficial for them. So public places should be without these things well worn by these people. Now, even if some of these people decide to refuse to say there's going to be like a bunch of peer pressure on them to just nevertheless wear these things. If they wear these things, we say like most of people will listen to what the leader has to say. Now these people will pressure the people who are like disobeying this, and we believe that they will make them do this, and of course in a diplomatic manner. But also this influence is very important. But even if extreme cases, and we certainly acknowledge that there is going to be extreme cases of people who will wear this in schools, in squares, on their jobs, etc., etc. We say that this now is going to be an exception. This is going to be an extreme exception, and that is very important. Also, if this happens, the legislator can just say in the media, these people aren't what we want, these people are not basically what we are striving for, and that is why we are distancing ourselves. But here's why this identity is very different, and that is why it is extremely pernicious to portray it in such a way. Several reasons for that, several points of analysis. One, religious offers moral guidance, and that's like the exclusivity of religion as an identity. Right? Nation, not so much, but religion, yes. So when you perceive someone being religious and like having these sort of religious symbols on him, then you connect him, you attach him with the moral framework of his or her religion. We think that's highly likely because we perceive religion as a framework of living. That especially this is the case if you are a religious man, right? But moreover, we say that people who are perceived as very religious also are perceived as having very strong communal links, right? So when we see, for example, in France, Muslims, we perceive them as portraying their religion in public, but the first connection that we have is not only that they have a different moral framework that we do, and that immediately distances us from them, but also that they are members of their community at first, and then secondly, they are members of France. We think that's like very pernicious, because we think that the only thing that connects us with these people is like some sort of civic identity, a citizen's identity that should be evolved later on. But moreover, we say that if their values are in opposition to our values, like for example Islamic values with the value of freedom of speech, once we cannot like draw Muhammad, etc., etc. Now, all these associations of people fighting against our basic values, like the freedom of speech, get in mind when we see those symbols on these people. We think that's harmful for their integration in society and leads to them having like worse outcomes in their lives because they communicate less with other people, on their jobs probably get discriminated, but if not, in a way, still be feared by the majority. In the long run, we believe that will turn into somewhat of a harmful policies for minorities because they don't have a sufficient political shield to defend themselves in this way. Now, another thing that we would like to add is also that these values of civic nationalism, basically something that is an overarching identity for all of us, should be advocated from these religious minorities. Usually majority responds very well when you show that you want to integrate. And by doing this, you will show that you want to integrate. People will recognize that you are different by the color of your skin or by your language. But if you are not showing your religious identity, you are showing that you want to integrate and be a part of this society. Now, for all these reasons and these benefits, we are proud to propose this.
I would like to thank the speaker for his fine speech and now invite the leader of opposition to present her remarks.
seems a very interesting idea of what integration consists of. It mainly consists of hiding your true identity. That's the way that they perceive that people best get integrated. We in our position side, we say quite the opposite. We want people to engage in the public spaces, and we believe the best representative to provide this integration is by having moderates stepping out in the public space representing these minority faiths. What I'm going to talk today about is the interests of the leaders of minority faiths, the actual people practicing these religions. I'm also going to talk about why the visualization of religion has to happen in the public space, and what the practical consequences of further radicalization takes place if you implement the policies of GOV. First, a few points of rebuttal. So the issue that they put out here that we're actually dealing with is the aggressive attitude towards minorities. And they generally say themselves, mainly not because of minorities, it's because of economic problems, etc. So we generally think that the fact of hiding economic or symbols of religion, if the main fact that they are disliked is general structural problems in society, economic problems, those structures will still exist. They will still be able to direct hate towards these minorities. You're not counteracting the actual fact why they're disliked. Because these people will still be different, even if you take them out of the public space. But by taking them out and forcing them out, you're legitimating the idea that they're not legitimate actors to be part of the public space. So generally they said they have a rise of right-wing groups. We believe they probably exist to the same degree. The worst is that they'd be even worse and more extreme. Why would that be? Because as he says in his earlier speech, religious leaders are local leaders, so everybody will listen and not go out. We do not necessarily agree with that characterization, that everybody belonging to a minority faith would no longer go out. We believe some would not go out, probably the moderates. What we do believe is that the radical representatives of those faiths would still go out in the public spaces, because they are the ones who feel so absolutely strongly about that religious belief that they would probably not stop just because somebody told them that. They would probably say, I'm here to fulfill my faith, and some leader over there has a dodgy interpretation of what text says. We believe those people will go out in the public space. And if you feel right-wing extremists and the unfair representation of what these minorities are, you're just spurring them, and you'll make that problem get even worse on your side of the house. What we also said, they offer the point of religious offers moral guidance, and we see certain symbols, we attach a moral framework to them, and that immediately makes us distant, because we see people primarily as Muslim and not French. We on the side of the opposition, we believe there's no inherent reason why you would not be able to be French and Muslim at the same time. And we do want to encourage that narrative that is absolutely possible. And we do believe that that's not facilitated by removing religious symbols and removing the possibility of being Muslim in the public space. That's not integration, that's hiding, and that's looking out of a part of an identity that's actually crucial to people. So first point, what's in the interest of leaders of certain faiths and the interest of minorities belonging to that faith? Like I guess we say congregation in English. Okay, so leaders are representative of a certain faith. They gather to mass, they interpret text, and one of the main roles is to ensure that their followers and the members of the congregation can get spiritual fulfillment. In order to get spiritual fulfillment, you have to have the option to practice your religion fully. You can't just shut off your religion as soon as you go out into public spaces, because most of these majorities will spend a certain amount of time out in schools where they need certain dietary requirements, where they might perhaps want to pray, where they want to wear a veil, where they want to wear a kippah, for example. They cannot simply shut this off and still get spiritual fulfillment. This would just be counteractive to the actual idea and the purpose of what the leader is there to encourage. It'd be actually detrimental to these followers themselves, and the fact that they will not be able to practice their religion and get the full access of it in itself. We believe that's in the counter-interest of the minority religion, it's in counter-interest of the actual leaders to do that. What we also do believe, what's practically going to happen when you set out these policies. What? We'll take closely, yes.
The reason why you cannot be French and Muslim at the same time is because no one from France is going to accept you as French person once you behave towards against the concept they believe that it's right.
I absolutely believe that you can be French and Muslim at the same time. I don't think that's a counter-election. The fact that some people are backlashing against it and haven't dwelled into that is not a legitimate reason to cancel out that option. You can still adhere to the idea of the French state, or French ideas, French history, and generally celebrate them, and combine that with the religion of being Muslim. That's not a pattern we agree on in that sense. But what do we think is actually going to happen when you encourage people to not go out? Okay, in status quo, we have moderates, we have extremists, both of them displaying their faith publicly. They both engage in public spaces, and they're all out there. What we do believe, though, when leaders start discouraging people from going out, who is going to have the audacity, as I say, but the nerve to actually challenge your leader, the one who's there for spiritual control and for guidance? We don't really think it's the moderates. They'll probably be able to follow in line. It will probably be the most radical ones that would have the nerve of doing this. What does a this mean on 2 points? You'd get a representation that would be fairly unfair of what this religion stands for and a minority of what it means in the interaction that would happen in the public space. But also, these leaders would lose the already limited control they have over these radical elements within the minorities already. If you push them further away and push them out in the public space and let them be the single microphone and a single voice representing your issue and cause, we believe that's what's going to cause a backlash in the long run against the idea if you can be Muslim and French instead of interacting. What we do say though, if we do generally visualize religion in the public space, when you have moderates representing it, we believe generally if you feel welcome in the public space, if it certainly belongs to you to a certain degree, people and moderates would be more out there. What happens in interaction in these public spaces? Of course, everybody's not going to come up and ask, why are you Muslim? Why are you wearing a kippah? Why are you wearing a veil? But in the sense that when you do, and when you do interact in that space with other people, you'd probably get a more moderate view of what this actually entails. The interaction would be more probable to happen because there'd be more people out there, and once you do interact, it's more probable that you get a moderate view and a moderate representation of what that religion consists of. What we heard a bit is like, oh, people will backlash. If we're a Christian country, we use the Christian symbols, and we generally fear the unusual. We generally think that first, people don't backlash that much to the fact that people have minority symbols out there. I generally think that you get used to most symbols with time, as you can see many societies happening in transitioning. But at least the majority will do that with time and get used to the fact that minorities are there. What on the other hand happens if you start discouraging them is that we actually do not encourage the idea of positive engagement, which we think is better. By doing that, by banishing people, would have less engagement, but the engagement happen is radical and it pushes this backlash and further clashes. Prejudice is not static. Prejudice changes with time. Therefore, we're very happy to have encouraged very fruitful and moderate interaction between majority and minority societies, which we believe that we will get if religious leaders encourage their members to go out and
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Firstly, we would like to make some clarifications because the side of the opposition really like the idea of accusing us that we're killing cultures around the world and creating unified world in Europe where everybody is Christian, and if it's not accepted. Firstly, I would like to do the first point of rebuttal with the question of further radicalization. So their logic stands like this. If you forbid this as a leader, then moderates will listen to you, but more radicalized groups will create even more radicalization that will scale in the public sphere, and this will create even a bigger backlash towards these minorities. Two answers on this. First answers. When leaders are encouraging their entire congregation to act in a certain way, then every exception from what leader is talking about is viewed just like that, as an exception. Because when media report on escalations in public sphere, what some radicalized groups did, they usually for the viewers present story, then the viewers stereotypize. They make stereotypes. So basically, they simplify and view the entire group as acting the same way, because they connect the behavior of the entire group with the ones that are mostly gaining media space and public sphere space, because they already don't know enough about these groups, because they are usually closed up when they come in new cards.
On that point.
No, thank you. Now going to this, that we cannot prove that these people will be hated less by the majority, because they will still recognize that they are different, they will still hate them because they are a minority, immigrants taking their jobs and stuff like that. But this is the answer on that. Firstly, we never took the burden to say that the entire hating process on someone who is different will stop. What we said from the side of the government is that they will be more easily accepted by the moderates that are now swayed by the far-right Democrat parties and far-right groupations in the majority. Now you have the middleman who actually has something positive to hear from the minority side by seeing their effort to fit in, by seeing their effort to say, we're not trying to steal your culture, we are just trying to practice our own, and we do not want to have some sort of war of cultures in your own country. We are trying to have our own right to believe in something. So this will be accepted as the offering of the peace. Now, on the other hand, what is really important here, no thank you, it is that once you are in the public sphere, when they say there will be more interaction by their case, we say no, more interaction will happen on our case. Because of the radicalization that is created now in the European culture, where a lot of people are afraid of those differences that are coming from Middle East, the Islam culture and stuff like that, that wasn't here before, people do not usually interact with them. And once you see some symbols on a person, you're even more disincentivized to talk to them, to hear their story, to see if they're a good or a bad person. The example for this is when you walk around streets of London. If you see a black person in a good suit, then you're not afraid and you actually want to talk to him. But if you see a black person or a brown person with some sort of religious expression on them, then you're really afraid and you're running on the other side of the street. This is how perception functions, and you have to prove to us really hard that people are not simplifying the world around them in order to prove that this is not true. No, thank you. Now, going to the last point of hiding the identity. No, thank you. And this is also my part of constructive. When Amelia comes up and says, well, yeah, now your value is hiding of the identity. Now you're saying that the right way to go is to say that these people don't have the right to be different, that we all need to assimilate, and so these people don't get the right to practice their religion. We say three answers to this. Practitioner of religion was never proven that has to be connected to symbols. Your dietary requirements are quite cool to have because many people have them. This is just a preference of what food would you like to eat. The second part of this is about not having full access to religion by this. Let's just say that even if it's not the full extent of practicing your religion. This is only connected to the public sphere. And on the other hand, from the side of the government, we believe that religion is something spiritual that needs to be given to you to practice in the way you feel that you're a Muslim, in the way that you respect those moral codes, in the way that you want to feel that you're connected to your God, not in a way that in order to feel this, you need to have a symbol around your neck. This is crucially important, but before I continue, I would like to take a second.
So given that kosher is food that needs to be sanctioned by a rabbi, does that therefore discourage people to take in public places kosher options or ask for kosher food?
You wear your food in your lunchbox if you wear it somewhere, but on the other hand, we don't see this as practicing the symbols of religion. Symbols of religion have a much complex meaning to them than just you choosing some food. We're not saying that you need to hide everything about yourself to show that you're from some sort of minority. We're just saying that that by putting a symbol on yourself, you're actually taking this as an assertion, as the agency of your religion. It's more putting yourself forward than just expressing yourself. This is how it's viewed. But more importantly, we believe that religious leaders actually have to disincentivize themselves from being connected from other countries where their minority religion is viewed as majority religion. For example, they are not supposed to think about political implications of this because the Sharia law, for example, is the example of religious leaders being politicized. We don't think that religious leaders should be involved in politics. We believe that they only are there to provide the moral code and keeping of culture, which can be done in a simple sphere of your own home. Now, you have to realize that majority doesn't have to do this, because in Europe, for many, many centuries, people have practiced their Christianity and then created democracy, and they find a way to make this complementary. The problem is that a lot of people believe that Islam and other religions are not connected with democracy. This is, of course, not true. It depends on a person that does it, but the majority views it as such. They believe that these values cannot be connected to democratic behavior. This is why we need to disincentivize from those views and actually prove to ourselves that the things that make us together are the things that are mostly similar for all of us, and that is being a citizen of one country. For all these reasons, we beg you to propose.
So we've heard that this is an offer of a peace treaty, if that's necessary. If we've learned anything in Route 9, peace treaties work if it's a valuable peace. Something you get something in return, not just being tolerated in a state where you should be allowed to practice your religion. We have 3 points. A, that which weakens the position of those minority leaders, that's bad, because they have a moderating effect. Second, that visibility and partial fulfillment of the symbols is extremely important for you to express yourself in society, to also reclaim some part of the public space, to feel welcome at home, and thereby improve the situation of yourself and the interactions with majority of the society. And lastly, because we believe that religion becomes less scary if it's in public space by more moderate people enacted, and how that will work. A little bit of rebuttal before that. So we hear this idea of fear of losing cultural homogeneity. Note that all of those cultural values are constructed. And you as a state have not always been Christian. Sweden managed to go from some vague pagan thing towards Christianity to some odd shape of agnosticism I can't properly define. What you can see is that in a lot of countries, people go through religious changes by the way population changes, by new countries, new ethnic groups coming in, presenting their religions. Some of them will be accepted, some partially influence the culture, and that's usually a very organic process that helps and that works. As you can also see, look in Germany, in parts of Berlin, like Neukölln and Kreuzberg, where people are actively engaging with those minority ideas. That happens first on an elite level, but then spreads out to a larger part of society. We think that's beneficial, and there's no inherent reason why they would be incapable. Even if there were, if their characterization is you can't be a proper Muslim and a French person, then that's terrible if we want to live in a state where there are French Muslims. If we want to be accepted and we want those people to interact in society, then you can't build up this bipolar model of saying you have to choose either or, because that means that some people would choose to be either completely French and therefore rejected from their home community, or choose to be completely Muslim, therefore rejected by the mass majority of the French population. Placing that burden upon the minority radicalizes them, makes them feel alien in the country they live in, therefore engage less in the social process. We think that's terrible. That's particularly true because we already proved to you, if you only want someone to blame, then your ethnicity, looking different, is often already sufficient, and we hear very, very little claims for why just having religious practice changes that. So first point, why are minority leaders such a good actor to do so? We often think they have a certain moderating effect. If you care particularly strong about religion and scripture, there's a big problem because those scriptures are very, very old. They're years back. They're from a different context, often in a different region, and they're often in different situations, namely at times where those people are the majority and were created. That means you often need a moderating effect of religious leaders who know the situation they're in, who are in contact often with other religious leaders, as you can see in a lot of cases, and therefore able to interpret and help people to interpret those laws. Why is it bad if there are no weekend in those interactions? Because what we can see is that if you publicly announce, don't practice your religion as much as you should, as you feel like wanting to do, at least for those people who are particularly extreme, who care very, very strong about religion, they'll feel like you're betraying their religion, the original idea of scripture and the way you're supposed to interact. That means less part of those groups are willing to engage in that group, you have more of a fragmentation of that group, but it also means partly open rebellion within those groups of extreme leaders saying, those people are mistreating our religion, shouldn't we fight back to reclaim it. That's bad. Second idea, why is visibility there? So they say something like religion is nothing about symbols. That seems very odd. Even their food box example is bad because it means that unless I've prepared my meal, I'm not able to spontaneously join someone for a group session because we have a spontaneous meeting. That means all of a sudden I have less chance to interact. That's particularly true if they're extended to prayer rooms. If you have a prayer room in a school, you can say I have to pray for 10 minutes now, later I'll join you immediately, compared to I have to go home now to pray, I have to withdraw to my private sphere, I have no way in the public space of expressing myself because I've been ordered not to do so, and therefore have less integration with the regular population. We think that's bad because it makes you feel uncomfortable, but it also makes other people feel uncomfortable. Why is that so? Okay, let's go into the details. So first of all, they talk about the acceptance and visibility. That's a big issue. But what does it happen to those people in real life? You only talk about minorities, that means crosses might still be visible. Very religious symbols, church bells, whatever, are still there. Whenever you enter the public space, you feel that this public space belongs to a specific majority group, which is not yours, and you're just not particularly caring much about your feelings because they're openly expressing them, whereas your leader tells you you shouldn't. Why is that bad? Because you don't trust the public space that belongs to yourself and as your own. If you can contribute to your public space, either through your clothing, through church bells, to shaping the way rooms are constructed in public buildings, it means it's partly your own. That means you integrate more into it, you have a higher feeling of belonging and adherence to that group, you care more for it, and then you're also more likely to develop, say, patriotic feeling, regional feelings, any form of feelings that makes you adhere to that group. Second of all, you feel less out of context. If you, for example, a first-generation migrant, you might feel more at home if at least some areas, some members and characteristics of home are there in the new home, which makes it easier to integrate later on. And thirdly, you're more comfortable by not having to constantly reflect, am I too open in the display of my religion? Do I have to constantly self-censor myself in the way I speak, in the way I dress? We think that's detrimental because if we have this constant awareness of how we act, and if we should change our behavior, that means that we self-censor, we feel uncomfortable. How do people react when they're uncomfortable? They're not particularly nice to talk to in the first place, so they're not particularly good advocates. They often feel either very rejecting of conversations, of exploring their identity, religion, or they become extremely defensive or aggressive when they are indeed questioned about their ethnicity, their background, because they don't feel as much welcome in this home as we would like them to be openly.
We want the evolution of differences. Wearing the symbol means you propagate something. Usually a country that is not France, but Israel if you're Jewish, or some Islam country if you're wearing those kind of symbols. This is the status quo, it's how majority perceives it.
Right, and majority perception changes if the society surrounding it changes. The whole idea that every time I symbolize something it's an aggressive act is completely constructed, and we think that the majority doesn't even perceive it that way. So why is that true? Because religion becomes less scary if it's more public, we believe so. That's why often areas with a higher degree of Muslims, for example in Berlin, tend to be more open. Why is that the case in particular? Because if you tell those people, do not do this, we already explained to you, the most extreme people are probably going to say, I'm sticking with scripture, I'm sticking with the traditional interpretation, I'm going out. Those people are scary. Religious people are not scary contrary to what they believe. Scary people are scary. If you have extremist people going out there and being connected to religious symbols, then you connect those bad people, extremist people, radicals to those symbols, and that's exactly what the media picks up, as they rightfully point out. If you encourage them, as we want to do in opposition, it means moderates go out, show their symbols in a friendly public sphere. That means possibly being comfortable in the way they do it, but also be more willing to explain what they're doing. If I have a friendly, moderate person, I can see that the way they perceive religion is not as extreme as media tells me, but I can also see that those people are often friendly and more willing to explain what religion means to me, giving me a positive first grasp of that religion, higher acceptance of a slow transition in society. That's what we want to achieve, therefore please support us.
I'd like to thank the speaker for his fine speech and now invite the member of government.
Madam Chair, Lunda probably right. when they tell you that you can be French and Muslim. But what we want to tell you is that you can also be Muslim and not necessarily publicly display your religion. 3 points on extension. 1, how this is perfectly legitimate, considering that religion can be interpreted in different ways, and how religious leaders already do this. 2, how backlash will most likely not happen. 3, how the community remains strong. Before that, rebuttal. 1, we tell you the reason why it is often hard to accept these people is because a lot of Western states are based on radical secularism. See France, for instance. We tell you that even ones that do express religion publicly, it is not done to an extent which is seen as extreme by the majority population. The issue with this is that once those people publicly display their religion, the majority group is unlikely to want to interact with them precisely because they see them as so different from them. This is what creates problems and lack of understanding. They tell us they'll get accepted in time. No, false, because 1, I already just said that, because they never even have that interaction to begin with, but 2, because those groups usually remain very small and very interconnected without the will to engage with the majority. Look at the example of Ireland and Northern Ireland, where even two Catholics and Protestants lived together for hundreds of years. You still have the troubles in the second part of the 20th century. We don't think this just changes with time. No. So then they tell us, yeah, but what if I want to pray what if I want to pray in school that I can't do? Now here's the deal. Religious leaders can tell you, okay, if you have to work, you can miss 1 prayer a day. The same way as it is more important to pray on Friday than on other days, the same way as the evening prayer is the most important one. Religion can already be interpreted. The same way that if you have a dietary problem, you can be allowed to withhold from the Ramadan fasting. The point is that this can already get interpreted. No, thank you. Then they tell us you're more likely to identify with the majority state if you say have prayer rooms. But the issue here is that you already have a huge stigma on you by the majority when you go into those prayer rooms. You already thought, why are you going there? Why are you praying 5 times a day when we have no need to do that? Even if that is built, you have an issue. But moreover, those things are even unlikely to happen in the status quo. France bans burqas. Switzerland almost banned minarets. It was overturned by the ECHR. Those states are already quite against them. So, legitimacy. We tell you, Madam Chair, that religion is about achieving your own link with God. And they never tell to us why it is necessary to publicly display your religion in order to do so. Firstly, recognize that a lot of Muslims can pray at home and do precisely that because it is your prayer and your public display of religion. It's about you achieving your link with God. It is not a necessity for you to display that in public. Sir. 2, we tell you that religion always adapts to outside circumstances. Recognize that Turkey banned burqas and public displays of Islamic symbols during Mehmet Ataturk, and it did not lead to Islam in Turkey becoming either more extreme nor people feeling alienated from it. So we also tell you that a lot of Western religions already incorporated a lot of pagan customs from before into it. So we also tell you that progressive leaders, and this is where we want to get to the point of leaders, say the new Pope is quite a progressive person in comparison with the previous one. True, he has alienated some people, but people still accept him. Why? 7 reasons. Firstly, we think that people have respect for institutions that have been there for a very long time, like churches. 2, extreme leaders find it very hard to gain traction because they have to fight in order to gain a group which they can speak to. Recognize that these people still go to churches. Going to a church or to a mosque is not a public display of religion. Sir. So what's the point there? This leader, the only difference now is that these leaders interpret religion in a way in which they tell you, okay, don't publicly display it. The norms which you already respected still remain there. That leader already still has your respect because the vast majority of norms are the ones which you already accepted in the first place. Sir. 4, we tell you that if you have to look at the comparative when you talk about extremists. Even if some extreme groups do come up, we tell you it's more likely to happen when that group is constantly alienated by the majority state so that they feel that they cannot integrate. That's when you have extreme groups which rise up, but those are against the majority states. That's when you have things like the 7th of July bombing in the UK. So, last we're going to tell you that you have good results from this policy, because at this moment, the majority state is more likely to accept these people. Why? Because there is often an impression that they do not want to integrate at all, that they want to live in their own microcosmatic world. Well, how does this change it? A lot of people in majority religious groups will see this as an act of good faith. I'll take closing in a second, which leads to them being more prone to accept these people. Closing.
Given that you recognize that religious minorities are often already alienated from society, why don't we alienate them more when we tell them, you need to change your religion right now on our terms, because otherwise you're not good enough to participate in our society?
It's not on our terms. It's on the terms that your religious leader, the person who you already reject, says to you. That is a huge difference, and why we support these policies. Because those religious leaders are precisely ones that community respects. And lastly, those people are often seen as an interpreter of the word of God on earth. So people don't necessarily have a tendency to question what they say. A lot of Catholics may privately disagree with the Pope's views on homosexuality, but that has not alienated them from the Catholic Church. Why the community remains strong and doesn't go away? Because still the main bonds that these people have are with their own cultural group. They still speak the language that group speaks. Their family and social circle is still there. They also have community gatherings in churches and mosques, or synagogues for that instance. What we tell you there is that those communities remain stronger, but the majority group is more likely to see them as willing to integrate, and they're less likely to otherize them, because at this moment those groups look far more similar to them, because the vast majority of Western states are secular, and we are used to that kind of secularism for hundreds of years. And even when you have public displays of religion, like the wearing of crosses, a lot of people don't give that much importance to it, and it is seen something which is more of a tradition than a pure public expression of religion. Madam Chair, you can be religious without displaying that publicly. These leaders continue having respect. Very proud to propose.
I would like to thank the speaker for his fine speech, and now invite the member of opposition.
Madam Speaker, the dangers facing Jews and Muslims today in Europe are genuine. We think, however, that when they feel that they have to give in to right-wing pressures and give up symbols that they hold them dear, and this won't really help in them feeling safe, in making sure that the right-wing attacks stop, but they're actually going to increase. What we're going to do for you in closing opposition is three things. Firstly, we're going to provide 4 reasons as to why we think this will increase extremism against these movements. Secondly, we're going to tell you what, even in the worst case, when attacks continue, we think those attacks can be used to galvanize support for the freedom of religions for these minorities. And thirdly, we're going to explain to you, finally, on the extremism point, why we think this will lead to more extremist minority religions, why we think that they will be worse in this case, and why therefore the conflict will deteriorate inclusively. So why will this then, before they do that, a couple of responses. So, they tell you in closing government that people will respect their leaders, and for that reason, they won't turn towards the extremists. We think that analysis was purely based on Catholicism, which isn't exactly a minority religion. Because Catholicism is a religion where people have almost entirely respect for the leaders, and there's a divine command from Rome, which is subordinated by God. That's far different, for instance, in Jewish scripture, where debate, where reading the Torah yourself, we're discussing on that, and we're therefore having the religious leader as a counselor and a guider, not as a ruler instead. That's why there's often public disagreement within these communities, and they're very likely to publicly disagree on this. More on that later. They then tell you France is a very secular state, therefore they will never accept these minority religion. They may not accept all facets of these religions. They may have banned burqas. They're still quite happy to ordinate other forms of religions. There are still public prayer rooms in France. More than that, I think that even if they don't really accept minority religion in entirety, if that's even the claim they're going to make, we still don't believe that French people just sit idly by and say, well, it's really great if you're going to be attacked by your religion. We saw massive public support, and synagogues were attacked from moderate France in Paris. A march 200,000 men strong through the centre, many of them comprising of Catholics who've allied themselves in the name of religious freedom. So we do think we can galvanise that support. So why then don't we think that they will help solve these problems? The first fallacy they make is thinking that the only way in which you can identify someone by its religion is by the display of religious heirlooms, etc. in the public. We tell you that quite often there are stereotypes amongst how a person of Jewish or Islamic descent looks. That means that these extremists still often call out people who have stereotypical Jewish racial features, for instance. And in that way, we think that all these kinds of oppression on the streets, this catcalling, will continue to exist. More than that, they can continue to go on, for instance, to our synagogues and protest in front of these movements, like what happened again in Paris. So we think in that way, these kind of extremist movements can still continue to exist. That means the fear is going to continue to exist. That lack of acceptance still continue to exist. People aren't going to feel safer in that regard, because now they have to make the synagogue unrecognizable. Now they can no longer tell whether a sermon is happening within a mosque. In that way, they have to be forced to go entirely underground. That hurts them really badly. Point two. We tell you maybe these elements of these rituals can feel as not that important. We do think they feel as highly important when they're part of the expression, when you're fighting against oppression in the first place, when they're a symbol of your resistance within an expression. When you remove that, people feel entirely afraid and fearful on their day-to-day interactions. We think that's highly damaging for these people. The main reason why Proposition wants to do this, presumably, is so that these people feel more safer. I don't think you feel safe when, instead of only feeling unsafe when you're called upon for being Jewish on the street, you now have the feeling every time you walk on the street you feel naked, not having a Jewish heirloom, because you're very afraid at any moment in time someone can point out and say, we don't like you. No thank you. Thirdly, we think this exacerbates existing stereotypes. We should now never have day-to-day interactions and see normal people living on the street, playing with children, etc., etc. The only thing you now see is media response towards your religion. What tends to be in the media news? Extremist Muslims, for instance. People who are very, very scary. That means it's more likely that existing stereotypes about scary Muslims or like global Zionist conspiracies in some countries in Eastern Europe are the only ones who continue existing. That means that it's far more likely that people's base assumptions about religion will be informed by these kind of narratives and not by day-to-day interactions. We understand that isn't a perfect comparison. At least it provides some counterweight or an opportunity for counterweight to exist, due to the forms that you kind of call out when the media responds to extremist Muslims, that you can have organizations stand in front of it and have counter messages, you have counter programming within national news sources. That is at least better than their side, but it's the only story that goes out. But finally, you now diminish public support for victims of attack, because nowadays, in our situation, when you're the victim of attack, we think the majority of people don't really think it's okay if you're attacked because of who you are. But now, the story will be, well, didn't that person maybe wear a religious symbol? Maybe he was not responsible for his own attack. In that way, we victim blame that person and reduce the public support that person gets. In all this way, these people feel less safe. Go ahead, open it.
Sir, in France, people are not practicing religion in public space from the majority. This is why praying on the street in France that Marine Le Pen used in her campaign was so legitimate to use, because it was so strange. Now you only have to face people with the fact that they're being racist if they don't support these people.
People don't express their religion in France. As a consequence, France has far more religion hate than, for instance, the UK or the Netherlands, where this does occur, because people never see this daily interaction. That example comes our side of the debate. But even in the worst case, even if attacks happen, what we tell you is that we're likely to side that can galvanize public support, because all the reasons I talked about, because there's a massive moderate majority who at least believes you should not be attacked for who you are. That means that when those attacks occur, you have massive public displays of support. You then get political capital increasing that, because you also see many moderates voting for the Labour Party, for the Muslim people in many of these countries, and they will get political support for more police protection, and in that way for more religious freedom of protection and for those kind of laws. That increases better on our side of the house when we can have full support and you don't get victim blaming. Why then will they become more extremists? Because what we tell you is when you feel It's when you feel that you can no longer express your religion, and when a religious leader says you can no longer express your religion because the literal reason that they are afraid of other things, because they're not going to use they're not going to use scriptural reasons that you have to wear these things. They have to give political reasons, like we are really afraid of extreme attacks. That means that these people say, I can no longer believe in my own religion. I will therefore join the extremists because those guys still tell me I can join a religion. That is why you get a massive increase, and that is why it becomes far more likely you see people being extremists on the streets, and it becomes far more likely that that is the narrative that will be perpetuated in society. For all those reasons, we're very proud to report.
I'd like to thank the speaker for his fine speech and now invite the government witness.
Many people, when they see someone wearing a burqa, say, ooh, terrorist. Because we've created that narrative. You get de-incentivized to talk to that person. But once that person takes burqa off and still remains Muslim and still fulfills the vast majority of religious norms, but you start talking to that someone, that is the moment where you realize that all the stereotypes you believe are false, that all of those things are untrue, and that you were wrong, and that you should definitely change. What are we telling you in a whip speech? A, why identity will still remain and why that way we're not jeopardizing people. And B, why we think that integration will happen and the extremists will not rise. Before that, a couple of points of rebuttal. In terms of leaders, A, leaders do exist in Islam. B, even though they formally do not exist in Judaism, you have a rabbi you want to discuss with. Therefore, vast majority of religions have some form or lead of leaders or people they extremely respect because they think they have huge knowledge. Therefore, they do have an incentive to talk to that someone, to respect what that someone says to them, and to try to follow what the leader or the smartest person in the religious community tells them. Number two, solidarity with Jews. No, that exists because of the historical reasons. A, because Jews were living in Europe for many, many years and Muslims didn't. And B, because of the entire history that happened with World War II in Europe where the solidarity towards Jews increased even more. Unfortunately, with Muslims, the things are quite different. They're more different than us, and we think that extremists exactly use those differences, but more of that in my summary speech. Number three, the story about they feel scared going in the street also goes on our side. Because once you go out with a burqa on the street, you're more likely to get attacked exactly because people have the perception that you are a terrorist. Once you don't have it, you're probably more safe on the streets of any city. Let's talk also about attacks. A, they already happen in the status quo. B, they do have sometimes support of people for being attacked. Why? Because of stereotypes that exist. Therefore, when sometimes someone attacks a Muslim, exactly because we live in an Islamophobic society, majority says, oh God, that must be a good thing, or maybe that's a good thing. We think that we need to break these stereotypes, and this is exactly the way how we're going to do it. More of that also in my summary. And thirdly, we don't think the general majority will always support attacks, or say, oh, he decided to wear burqas even though we told him not to publicly celebrate religion, therefore it must be his fault. People generally do not support other people going out there and beating them up. But we think that on our side of the house, even if someone sometimes supported, now on our side of the house, that's not going to happen. And in terms of the religious texts and scripts, we think that since those books are kind of confusing, your religious leader has the opportunity to explain to you that the reasons why you shouldn't publicly interpret your religion are for the religious reasons, not for political ones. Community and identity. Religion and believing, it can be in the domain of private. If you want to believe in God, if you want to share your thoughts with God or pray with your God, you don't need a room. You can do it anywhere, anytime, or you can do it in your house. B, you will still have your leader with whom you can discuss things, with whom you can practice your religion, with whom you can discuss whether or not some norms are okay or not. Thirdly, we also say values you believe in, norms you believe in still stay. So if you are a Muslim and you think that it's wrong to eat pork, you don't have to eat pork. But you don't have to go out there and publicly constantly talk, we don't eat pork, we don't eat pork. Because it's about what you believe and it's about how you feel when you're doing something. Thirdly, we think that once religious leaders are the one discussing these kind of things, that is the moment where religion can adapt and change. Therefore, instead of having a mandatory stuff in school where you're like, can't eat pork and having the school provide you that, you can provide that in your house and do it. And your religious leader can explain to you that that is still a good thing. My partner already gave you example with Turkey, where adoption happened and people didn't backlash. But the most important thing that we really need to talk about, because we think that we've proven to you that their identity can stay. Everything they believe in, everything they want to do, they get to still do. Therefore, you still get to feel like a Muslim. But the problem is, if you want to feel also like French, what happens then? And that's where I get to integration point. No, thank you. In status quo, they have an issue to integrate. Why? Because people mostly don't accept it, and then they feel excluded. And what happens then? That is the moment where extremists rise, on both sides. Why? Because we are different. And that is something that tends to scare people. I don't understand you. You're different from me. You're something unknown to me. And how can I approach to you when I don't know what's actually okay for you and what's not? And that is the moment that extremists on both sides use. Some extremists of majority tells you they're here to steal your job. Look how different they are. They're all terrorists. Hate them. They're different. And then they feel excluded because majority supports it. Then extremists of minority say, look at them. They're excluding you. They don't like you. You should also hate them. And that is the moment where extremists actually are bigger and more harmful for everyone on their side of the house rather than ours. What happens when you take off that burqa? Then I might not be scared to talk to someone because my extreme leader told me not to talk to someone who has burqa. And then once I talk to you, that's the moment where I realize that we're actually the same. That we're both humans with just different types of things we believe in, with different norms we believe in. But no, the narratives that do exist and the stereotypes that do exist aren't really true. And that is why when we think that extremists actually lose arguments, because then you realize that those false differences that they've been representing to you all the time aren't really true. That not every Muslim is a terrorist, that not every Muslim woman is banned from everything, that it's actually the way of choice, how you want to live your life. But that all stereotypes that are represented uniquely aren't true. Closing.
If you hide your if religious leaders tell you you need to hide your religious identity, then probably you're not going to be very willing to discuss religion with strangers.
If someone asks you what is your religion, you're most certainly not going to pretend you're not a Muslim. Of course you can say you're a Muslim. The difference is just that you are not going to go and point that out in school and go and pray in your school. Rather than that, you can do it in your house. So you're not pretending to be something that you're not. You're just not representing every part of the things that you believe in that aren't really necessary for your identity. Let's talk also about the backlash. So firstly, we think that extremists of minority are going to lose their arguments for two major reasons. First major reason is finally the society will start accepting you because majority will start talking to you and realizing how wrong they were with all the stereotypes and prejudices they believed in. But second thing is you're not going to feel like Western liberal democracies imposed change on you because it wasn't the president of France telling you you cannot wear burqas public. Rather than that, it was your leader telling to you this is much better for you to do. Second thing, society will start accepting that. On two levels this has changed. Firstly, we think, as I already said, majority will change their perception about the vast majority of people. So you're not going to have that, ooh, Muslim must be a terrorist narrative that unfortunately exists in our society. But more importantly, once you start changing yourself and now publicly show your religion or practice your religion, you will finally see that majority accepts you. Once majority accepts you, you get the benefits on both sides. On this world, you get accepted, and you get to getting benefits from being accepted on this world as much as you can. But secondly, you also get benefits from up their world, because no one bans you to believe in Quran, and no one bans you to believe in your norms and your values. Because we think that people should be accepted, and this is the way proud to propose.
I would like to thank the speaker for her fine speech, and now to conclude this debate, I'd like to invite the opposition.
Madam Speaker, when a Jewish person gets attacked on the street, we want the narrative to be that anti-Semitism is never okay. We don't want the narrative to be that maybe this person themselves were to blame for that anti-Semitism because they publicly displayed and openly conveyed the message that they were Jewish. That kind of narrative is the narrative that they are creating. We think that that narrative is wrong, that narrative is abhorrent. We think that in order to create a narrative that attacks on any kind of religions are never okay, so we allow people to openly express their religion, where we don't make people scared of their religion. Because closing opposition can tell you, but in civil conversations, I might still tell you I am Muslim. You won't. Why not? Dan has given you several reasons for that already that were completely unresponded to. Why won't you do that? The reason why your leaders tell you, please don't wear don't wear a jihad or wear any other symbols that express your religion in public, because you need to be scared. Because when you can be identified as belonging to this minority religion, all kinds of crazy attacks might happen to you, and the outside world is the world you need to be scared of. The problem with that is if the narrative is when people know to which religion you belong, you are scared. You're not likely to tell a stranger, I am Muslim, and are therefore willing to engage in a civil conversation with them. That means that it is less likely that the general public will know what kind of religious minority people belong to, but it also means it is less likely that the general public will therefore have positive experiences with these minorities. We think that that is harmful for multiple reasons. I'm going to make this debate on 2 points. First of all, I'm going to tell you why we think that the anti-religion narrative and hate towards religion is going to increase within society, why we think that it's massively problematic. We don't want a society where it is more likely that people like Geert Wilders and like Marianne Le Pen are going to be voted into government, because we think that is horrible. The second thing I'm going to talk about, where religious extremists are more likely to occur, where we also think that that is problematic for society, because we crowd out the more nuanced and the more moderate narrative. Opening.
Jewish persons were attacked in Paris on the street because practicing religion in public space is connected to fundamental state's religious state. This was an attack on Israel, and this is why the minority was suffering. They are more Jewish than French in their eyes because of this display in public.
Madam Speaker, we're not claiming on side opposition that we think that under our model attacks will never happen. We're very sorry that they do. We are, however, claiming that we think that when an attack is happening, we should condemn every attack that happens against every minority. That we shouldn't tell that minority that maybe they themselves were to blame for that attack because they openly and publicly displayed to what religion they belong to. Okay, why is anti-religious narrative going to increase, and is this not going to lead to any kind of integration? Opening up a proposition told us that as long as we can never see to what religion people belong to, we're all going to be nice, fluffy, and civilized to each other. We don't think that that is true. Dan, in his extension, pointed out that the narrative that is there and that will continue to be there about minorities, and especially about Muslim minorities, is that they are scary. Because when we read out crime, we often read out that this crime was committed by an immigrant who came from Morocco and is therefore, in my opinion, most likely going to be a Muslim. These kinds of information are not going to be prohibited from being broadcasted in the media under their model. That means that the information I'm going to get about those minorities is still that they are dangerous and harmful and threatening to the existence of the majority in society. The problem with that is that I now no longer have this very nice and lovely Muslim woman working next to me wearing a jihad and is recognizably Muslim. That gives me the counter-narrative and a positive image of what being belonging to a religious minority can be. That means that I'm therefore more likely to buy into the rhetoric of people like Geert Wilders, who are telling me that those minorities are awful and that we therefore need to impose racist and offensive policies within countries. We don't want that to happen, but we can only stop that from happening when positive encounters with people from religious minorities are still there. We think that they are limiting the chance of me having a positive encounter with minorities under their policy. Closing.
In the status quo, people will not even talk to someone wearing burqa stereotypes. Once you impose this policy, you will firstly talk to someone, and after some time, once you maybe find out that someone was a Muslim, you have a proof of your stereotypes being wrong. In status quo, you won't start a conversation.
Madam Speaker, we completely deny that on the basis that France banned the burqa, that everyone in Europe is really, really scared of someone wearing a burqa, and is therefore not willing to talk to that person. We think that racist people will always be there. We don't think that the majority of Europe or the majority of the world is racist, and that therefore their premise is a correct premise that they can make. But what about extremism, and why do we think that extremism is going to be more likely? They tell you religious leaders often are important within their communities and have like a lot to say and are therefore the perfect body to implement this. Recognize that Dan already explained to you that religious leaders are not necessarily as authoritative as they claim them to be. Recognize also that being Muslim doesn't necessarily mean the same thing for everyone. That is why, for example, we have the Shiites and the Sunnis who completely disagree upon certain things. That is why, for example, within Judaism, we have people who interpret the Torah on different ways and on their own account. But the reason why we think that is problematic, because that we think that moderate religious leaders often have a very good function in integrating people in society. We think that moderate leaders are able to form a link between that society and the people around them. We think that you're going to hinder that, because those people no longer trust their moderate leaders, because the moderate leaders are pressing the agenda of the majority. That is problematic, because that means that those minority people who do think that the public display of religion is important to their identity are more likely to turn to more extremist leaders within their community. They then tell you, yeah, but we think that it is just not important to your identity because you can express your religion on any other account. Given that they also recognize that religion is a personal experience, I don't think that they can make the claim that religious interpretation for every single individual is the same. We think it is an individual choice to value religious symbols upon you. We therefore think that extremism is a likely thing to factor in. We already see an increase in extremism, right? We already see that, for example, the fraction of ISIS within the Netherlands is growing stronger. They're having massive protests on the streets, which we think are dangerous because they're often violent. We think that these things are more likely to happen when we tell people within the religion, we don't like you because you're not like the majority. That means that they're more likely going to press for their own agenda rather than willing to integrate and willing to assimilate. Madam Speaker, we never agree with any violence against religion. They're going to make that more likely to happen. They're going to make violence against anyone more likely, integration less likely. We're very proud